together again. Welcome back to the library, Craig. I'm sorry it's kind of dirty. It's been a busy, past 8 months? How long has it been?
It's been some months. It's been a few months. I think it was a little cooler, but it was definitely before the holidays.
Yeah. Oh, God. So,
it's been a while.
That's crazy. Well, as you may see wandering around the library, I've now inherited a geriatric cat.
Okay.
So that's a whole thing, and
okay.
Well, there's the geriatric cat right there. And we'll do it. To start us off, I did grab a shot. This is... it's Barrel 1. It is a highly suspect bottle that was brought by my wife's family from Costa Rica. So,
okay, here we go.
We'll start with a little bit of rum.
And we'll start off, too, saying we're not as going pretty deep into it like we were our last episode, which was fun.
No, I actually can't listen to that episode, Craig. As I said in the thing, it was after a very long work weekend, and Craig showed up at my door when I was already well on my way to the bag, and I fear that I acquired the bag midway through that episode. So for all of you out there in Radio Land, I apologize. It was a rough weekend.
Do you remember the alien operation game?
I remember all of it. I absolutely remember all of it. It was great. I just didn't like my voice. But anyway, Sláinte.
All right,
here
we go. Ooh. That's good.
It's surprisingly good, right?
It's good. It's a rum?
Yeah, it's a rum.
Costa Rica.
Probably Costa Rica.
Wow.
Yeah. Rose's mom is like the Lord Vader of the Costa Rican education system. So it's for a different podcast, though.
Oh, okay. All the good rums. Yes, we've talked about that, doing another podcast.
Yeah, all the podcasts. So, gotta ask. I don't like to know what we're going to do until we do it. That's just me.
Okay.
I know I've put ideas out here. What are we going to talk about today?
Today is an episode you have been interested in doing. So we tell a lot of stories on this episode, or I tell stories from past interviews I did from over 20 years ago, and some more recent, just because in conversation it comes up somehow. But, it's kind of like, hey, you used to ghost hunt, didn't you? And I'm like, no, I wasn't actually ghost hunting. I was trying to break into writing, and I would go and stay at haunted houses or whatever, and I would get these stories for a newspaper columnist writer back in the 90s, because I wanted to break into writing before it went to archaeology. That's another podcast altogether. But anyhow, today we're going to discuss something that you brought up before, all the science behind this, which we're not going to be interviewing any scientists, sadly, but we're going to kind of discuss the more physical stuff that goes on in these hauntings. And we have stories lined up today.
Is this cold as ice?
This is cold as ice.
You're as cold as ice. I love it. The physical phenomena. Phenomena. The phenomena of hauntings.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yes.
I'm here for that.
The cold spots, the heavy weight that gets moved, voices and how they can mimic. All of that stuff we're going to discuss in this episode because we have some stories that, interviews that we're going to do with the show as we normally do. And then kind of just discuss this whole topic that you mentioned before about why is it when I go into a room it gets very cold or the energy dies or whatever, or a radio turns on and loud static plays.
Not me specifically.
No.
All of that is not happening.
Not right in here, not right now. No, we're not. Again, we're not ghost hunting.
Why does the energy die when I walk in a room? You're a loser.
Anyhow, so we're gonna lead into this. So whenever you're ready, any questions or anything, and we'll go into the stories here.
No, we're talking ghost stories with a particular focus on the phenomena behind them.
The things that take place that we try to explain, or how can you explain in science, because you can't think that everybody is just, there's too much gas in the room and they're hallucinating, or, they don't get out enough, or they're, that they're actually experiencing something or seeing something. Yes?
No, it's just a really good point, and at some point in this episode, we should loop in gas, Victorian era, hauntings, all that, and why that works. But
yeah, all right.
Putting that out.
Absolutely. Okay, here comes our first story.
Hit me with it.
Do it. All right.
This is Eerie, a podcast Eerie about everything creepy. Eerie.
There are ghosts all over that place, man. They even had to come in and have them exercised. Now that was the same house that the UFO was at.
Oh.
Same house. But the ghosts would get on you. It was a man. The man died in the other house. The woman was killed. And evidently they had some lady come in, with, I don't know what all crap they carry, incense and stuff and chants, I don't know.
Huh.
But anyway, she was saying one ghost didn't know the other ghost was here. But people seen that guy all over the place, seen him out in the yard. He would come in and he would sit on somebody's lap and their leg would start going really, really cold. Or he would hang on them and their arms would start going cold. It's like, man, it's just cold chill. Oh yeah, in the house too.
Oh, okay.
This is another thing.
Yeah.
There was a dog, a dead dog. Right now, the kitchen set in this place. Here's this kind of like a dining room area, living room, and the dog would go this way, by the door, right? Because you had like the door to the kitchen. You would run past it. First time it happened, I said, "Oh, Charlie got in," because I thought it was our cat. So I got over there, and there's no Charlie. I said, "Crap!" Everybody seen that dog, and he always ran in the same direction. I seen him there. Yeah, he's there.
Huh.
Why?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, dogs. Now,
Yeah,
see, I got a hard time with ghosts.
Yeah.
Oh. I really do. I mean, I see shit. Whatever the furball is, I see it. But and the noise.
Wow. Okay, I don't even know where to start with this one. So, guy murders his wife in one house. Guy dies in another house. Guy who dies, not murdered guy, is hanging around people and making himself felt by his presence. Did anybody, one, ever see the ghost, or were they just attributing the cold? Did they see him hanging on a person? Like, look over like, Frank, you've got a old man hanging off you, man. Like, I just want to know, one, was there visual accompanied by the phenomenon, or was the visual independent of the phenomenon? Are we seeing ghosts and then we're getting chills?
Well, no, he didn't say if he saw it, because I asked him, I said, did you ever see this old man? He says, no, but others did. And he would hang on these people and make them cold. And I'm just thinking of people with, what is it, where you like your clothes?
Stranger danger? Craig,
only it's somebody from another century.
Clearly, no disrespect to the dead. No disrespect to the dead. Clearly, this is a nasty old man ghost, though. The hanging on people is bad enough, but sitting in laps, like, I'm not trying to get a spectral twerk. Okay? Like, that's freaky. I'm an alive man, and I don't sit in people's laps. So, either this man was a freak before he died, or he hit the spectral realm and got nasty. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to mess you up. But I'm just like, in the lap. Dude.
Make them cold. Yeah, I don't know. I don't understand it either. It's the first first time I've heard a story like this where...
Ghost twerk?
A ghost was, yes, twerking on individuals in this house.
So I got hung up on spectral twerking. So we've got one ghost. We've got a second ghost that didn't know the ghost was there, and we also have a ghost doge, a ghost dog that is running through the house.
Yes.
At the same time.
Yeah.
Not necessarily connected though.
I don't know. That's the thing. But I thought it was interesting because on rare occasion I've heard about a ghost animal or pet. I've not heard one about a dog that's like Pavlov's, just on cue at a certain time just runs through house in the same direction.
Well, now, I mean, we could debate a few different things. Like,
Okay.
I am by no means a scientist. Don't laugh at that. I have a very analytical mind.
No, I didn't say anything.
But it feels like a few things are going on. I mean, I think, when you hear people talk about ghosts, normally there is assumption that you are being haunted by a Homo sapien. Or what was a Homo sapien, or at least a Cro-Magnon, right? You don't often think of pet hauntings. So I feel like, people talk about, there was great trauma, and they weren't able to move on. Well, that doesn't really apply with a dog. I mean, they really don't even remember pooping on the floor. I mean, I love dogs. My dog is my baby boy, but there is no... Dogs lack that object permanence, Sometimes people say they hang around because it's a well-loved place. Again, the dog, a little more plausible. Not in the same way with a person, though. So, my initial gut would be like, the dog really loved things, and the dog keeps going. But hearing the story, I kind of wonder if you're looking at multiple things happening at once. My wife was mentioning earlier, about dimensional theory, pocket dimensions, the separations in which, we're constantly living with diverting futures and diverting possibilities, and the idea that one can bleed over from the other. Yeah. So I'm kind of wondering if the dog is more like, if you've ever seen a tape skip or a record skip, you know what I mean? Where that's not as much of a classic haunting with agency,
It's not intentionally trying to get your attention to...
I'm gonna grind on this dude for spectral bucks. No, the dog strikes me more as like a glitch, like a record skipping or something like that.
Right. Well, and I mentioned this in an earlier show where there was a friend who, back in the early 90s, had told a story about him knowing somebody that there was an old house that sat in a lower meadow field near, like way out in the country kind of thing. House was abandoned, but at a certain time of day you would always hear this organ play in it. Nobody was in the house, but you hear an organ play. House either burned down or was demolished, something happened to it, but after the fact, he said that you would still hear this organ, even though there was no house, no instrument, nothing, but you would hear it play at a daytime hour or something, and he said you would just hear it, and it was like, but the house is gone, it's gone. But
Was it the same time?
I believe he said, he might have, I don't remember. That was a long time ago when he told me the story, but that was the only thing that reminded me of that, was this sort of caught in a loop sort of thing. Like it's kind of...
Caught in a loop, or, you read in fantasy and sci-fi when there have been a couple books on this. I think about particularly the Chronicles of Amber, which are sitting right over there, in which Amber is the one true world and all others are but shadows of Amber, and there's princes in Amber and they can walk through. I feel like things like the dog or the organ, because, certainly I hope our pipe organs aren't haunting us. I feel that is more akin to like a thinness in the veil, an intersection with another possibility or another time, more than what you would consider a classic haunting. Like, look, my dog runs in the same pattern all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if you had someone in a pocket dimension next door and they were tuning in, at 11 o'clock, my dog's going to punch on the back door and go bark at possums.
Okay.
Like, that happens on a daily occurrence. And so that feels more thin. Same thing like the organ. They're associating it with the house. But if, you're positing kind of this thinness between worlds, you could have a church there.
Okay.
That church could be playing organs. That's why I was like, is it at the same time?
Okay. That's interesting because you sometimes will hear stories when you out west, Texas, New Mexico, of old border rangers or cowboys that people still claim they see riding in certain areas at night, but they're not real, they're ghosts, along roadsides. But it's like they're still on duty. It's like this pattern, repetitive.
Right.
Just like it's just this ongoing cycle sort of thing.
Well, and we're all shooting from the hip. I mean, I think we're looking at three things. We're looking at, like, agency of the spectral creature. We are looking at the fundamental record skip of the creature, or we're examining a thinness in which what you're viewing is occurring, it's just not occurring in your now.
Sure. Okay. Makes sense. All right. So now let's move on to the second story.
Anyway, it was pretty interesting. We don't know all the details of the history to try and track this story. And then I talked to the lady who owned this house before me, and I said, there was a ghost in the house. And she said, yeah. And she said, I saw it. And so there was Helen, and I can't remember the man's name. They built this house, and he died in it in the 50s. Sitting in the recliner waiting for his wife to get ready for church, and he had a heart attack. Anyway, so the other owner, she would come home or get up or something, and her recliner would be moved. And she also said he sat on her bed. She saw him standing, leaning against the doorway. He had a hat and tie and everything. And then there was one night where she heard this loud bang, and she had a German Shepherd, and the dog wasn't barking or anything, and she kept calling the dog, and the dog wouldn't come. So she got out and crept out to look and see what it was, and there was a cold air register, those metal registers, and there was a rug over that and a magazine rack. The rug and the magazine rack were in place where they were supposed to be, where the register belonged, but that register grate was upside down in the middle of the living room. And she's like, okay. She starts talking to the ghost, and she says, okay, I know you're here, probably trying to take care of your house. And she says, your house is going to be okay, but you've got to leave because you just scared the hell out of me. And she said he left.
I like that less. No, I mean, and I feel like, we should have given more credence to the elderly man who was making people cold. I am a little bit more okay with ghostly shenanigans, like, I'm going to give him Freezey. That's inherently, that's good crack. That's just harmless prank. If I came back as a ghost, I would do the same thing. Spectral wet willies all around. I really don't like the idea that something has enough motive power to physically be moving things through the house. I think, I was saying, we might be looking at a few different things. I feel like we're looking at a few different orders of magnitude as well when we talk about that. Because, honestly, I have my own theories about the cold presence that people have. I'll just lay it out here as a precursor to the other. Energy is a thing. everything requires energy to be. And so I've kind of always had the feeling when people talk about, oh, it's a spectral chill. Well, yeah, I'm pretty sure like it's taking energy from somewhere, and in my mind it would be the ambient heat within the room, the energy that is latent within the air and the surroundings, which is why it's feeling like a sudden temperature plunge, is because it's kind of like you're drawing on the mains, you're sucking from the surrounding area, which leaves the visceral presence of cold. Does that make sense? Did
Yes.
I phrase that
No, it makes sense.
in a manner? That's always been my feeling about the spectral chill. I was like, oh yeah, it's just slurping from the ambient environment. But if you're talking about a spectral creature that's moving heavy furniture, that's a whole different order of magnitude, especially if it's not accompanied by any of those things. Like, I mean, I don't want to say I'd feel better if the light suddenly flickered out, the room got bone chill, and the furniture started moving. All right, I take that back. That would not make me feel better at all. That would scare me more. But, you know, whenever things are moving, especially if no one is seeing them, that one always raises my eyebrow a little bit more, because I can't even wrap my head around I hate to say the physics of it, but you know what I'm saying? Like, how did that move? How did that get there? And nobody else noticed anything. I feel like sometimes with the moving, I almost expect more human agency in that, but the lady being like, everything is neatly stacked?
Every state, or every other state, I should say, has a story about a school bus or a vehicle of some kind that's hit by a train. Then when you sprinkle baby powder on it, kids' handprints show up and it moves the car across the track if you accidentally stall or break down. You've never heard that story?
No, I don't hang out with freaks.
Well, there's a story. Okay, Texas had them. I know Illinois has them. Missouri, I'm pretty sure, has it.
They always have the baby powder thing?
Well, yeah. So what it is like, there's been a wreck at some time in history. A school bus or something was hit, and kids were passengers. So now, let's say you're driving over the railroad tracks, and you somehow stall. I don't know. Whatever car you're driving will stall out on the railroad tracks. Then, if you get out, or if you turn your car off, but I don't know if they're in neutral or what. But they sprinkle baby powder on the back of the car. Little handprints show up, and you can see where they're... Because the car moves then off the tracks. Like the kids are like willingly staying there to keep anybody else from getting hit on this railroad. You've never heard that story?
Yeah.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
That's kind of like urban legend, I think.
Well, and I think that's to a point that I keep hammering every time we have one of these episodes, which things get in the social consciousness. And so, you know, I'm sure if we walk the cat back far enough, we would find some incident story, some Genesis story, some story of these children with baby powder on the bridge. Mm-hmm. So they're not pushing a spectral bus. If you're sprinkling baby powder on your own car,
and then you see their handprints where they're pushing the vehicle.
But they don't push until they get the baby powder.
Well, no. The car will move. The baby powder just comes along so you can see the handprints. And you know, and when you think about that, you have to think that it's happened so much. Somebody came up with the idea of, let's get some baby powder and see if we see handprints. And maybe the car was dusty. They drove through the road, or, you know.
That's my thing with the story. These stories, I'm like, you know, that is so clearly an urban myth. Like, well, parents, I suppose, are rolling around with baby powder. But when my car stalls, my first thought is not, I ought to dust my rear view mirror with baby powder.
To see if it'll get moved.
See if it'll get moved by spectral children.
But what they do is, apparently, like an area where there's a known haunted, you know, like where it's vehicles wrecked or whatever, and kids were involved, they will park their car, especially if it's railroad tracks, like a train hits it. They will park their car on it and they get out and see if it moves. I mean, there's so many questions there, but these are like... But what's funny about these stories is they're accepted. Because you have enough believers, the story's moving around. Or it gets around. Like, people are like, oh, you know, don't go, you know, that railroad where some kids got hit, they parked you park your car on it now, they make sure they move it across. You know, you just put it and they'll put it. I don't know if you put it neutral or what, but the car will move.
Well, if there's a downgrade,
well,
and
sure,
you put your car in neutral,
that
it
would
roll.
make sense. Yeah, but I don't know. I don't even know how we got to that. We were telling another story. We got off on the urban legend. Kids and
moving things.
Moving things, yes.
So the movement is normally associated with children?
I don't know. No, because we just told the earlier story about the grate.
Oh yeah, the old guy with the fedora
that took the grate off and the floor. So it's a heavy object. Again, something that has the power that should just. I mean, and you hear ghost stories. Ghosts walk through doors, through walls. They appear, they disappear. But there's a force involved now as well, where they can move an object. And you hear, like I've heard stories where something will levitate and drop on the floor, or it'll get knocked off. So that's interesting that there's enough of this energy that's being drawn in, like when you're saying the cold, that now it takes on a whole, like, where it can actually physically push something over or knock it off, and you hear stories about people being shoved downstairs or whatever. You've never heard those stories? It's face right now. You've not heard those stories either, where somebody gets pushed?
I've heard the stories. I just don't like the stories. Like,
okay, that's fair.
I mean, again, like if we were breaking this out on a classification system, creepy old cold man is a magnitude greater than harmless ghost dog.
Okay.
But both pale in comparison to malevolent stair shoving or furniture rearranging.
Child moving furniture around.
That's
to get her way.
That's a whole different thing. And you have to ask, if it is spectral, are they trying to bring things back into a state that they approve of?
Well, her thinking, as she tells in the story, was that she felt like he was just looking after his house. This was a normal thing he did. He's watching over his house.
So he was checking the air vents.
Yeah. It's something he did, I guess.
Dude. Now that's a useful ghost. That's a selling point.
Well, I mean, that's the thing, is like I said a little while ago, you hear hauntings where it's somebody who that was their job their whole life, and they just continue it, or people still see them doing it. It's
that
like,
is hell.
Is it a... Well, yeah. Unless they love it, and that's all they did and know.
Do you love your job?
I really like my job. I really like my boss. I like my coworkers. I would not haunt the place.
That's what I'm saying. Like, your afterlife, is that what you want to do?
Well, but again, it goes back to that stain in time that we're seeing over and over, and that's not really that person. It's just this, it's
memory.
You've walked the grass so much, there's a path there,
It's called the desire path.
Actually. Okay. Well, see, that's what I'm wondering in some of these. And then there's the others, the Mr. Freeze, and then the
Mr. Freeze,
and then, and the little girl, and so anyhow. Guy in the fedora, he's still showing up, and he's interacting with her. He's looking at her through his doorway, or her doorway out.
So what's your take on these? I mean, normally you read these to me and I opine. What is your thought? Why would they do this?
So full of questions. I don't know. And my questions go a little deeper. Like I said earlier, I always find it interesting when a spirit can come back or is seen and chooses what time frame their life was. And I'll hear people say, well, I think it was when they were the happiest in their life, so they'll appear in their 30s or when they're a teenager. But I'm like, they pick out their outfit. How is your brain? Like, what is it in us that can see, all of that detail that they can bestow upon us? Because they're not tangible,
If you're making people cold, you're kind of tangible.
Well, but it's just this. I don't know. For me, I stumble on a lot of this stuff. Because I ask a lot of questions on it. I feel like to allow yourself a certain level, then you're really allowing all these other levels. Like people will ask me or say, well, maybe it was happy you were doing that or whatever. I'm like, no, I don't think that this thing understood. But then I'm getting to that level now where I'm trying to assess the thinking of beyond. This dimension, this life, whatever.
Well, I mean, maybe that's, classifications. Maybe, you have your garden variety haunting is the skipped record phenomenon, in which you're checking your air vents, you're straightening your fedora,
Standing in the doorway.
standing in the doorway, the more agency that you're attributing to these spectral things, the creepier it gets. You know, if you're like, he liked to check himself in the mirror. There was a mirror in the hallway. He was happiest when he was checking himself in the mirror. That's just a snapshot. Let him go. You're an old dude sitting in people's laps? Gross. That's...
But you know, when we discussed this briefly during the UFO episode, you said that you felt like he was pulling their energy or drawing off of it, you thought.
Not so much off the persons, just the ambient within the environment.
Gotcha.
You know, I mean, think of it like the law of entropy. Heat is a very orderly state of being. Cold is relatively disorderly. You have to input energy to make things hot, and then they break down into cold naturally. Same thing. You heat up a kettle, you turn it off, you walk away for an hour, it's cold again. And so it's not so much that I'm saying he's sucking life force out of the people, like some vampiric thing, and just more that the manifesting is pulling that ordered energy from the ambient environment around them, which is perceived by humans as the sensation of cold.
Next story also takes place in Jefferson County again.
What is up with Jefferson County and the hauntings?
I heard it's a crazy place.
How many school buses have been hit by children?
Children? You mean hit by some other vehicle?
Oh, did I say
Children were on
hit by
board.
children? I was driving a school bus and this horde of spectral children just came out and Terry Tate office linebackered my bus.
But anyway, she was a real estate agent. There's a house somewhere out here that is so haunted that none of the agents will go out there and show it. They were so afraid. I mean, doors slam, things move. It's like, and she says there's a law in Missouri. If this is true or not, I got no idea. It's called occupation law. If your house has got ghosts, you got to specify that it's occupied. How do you do that?
I don't.
You're saying Missouri state law says if you're a realtor and you have active knowledge of a haunting, you have to disclose that?
I guess so.
Much like a water main break or anything like
Yeah.
that?
Oh, by the way, we have a guy that likes to freeze you.
By the way, this house is inhabited by Mr. Freeze. Well, no, I would think that is plausible. Missouri can be quite backwards in some regards, and so I would not be surprised if we had a law still on the books that required people to disclose spectral activity. That, in fact, is the least surprising thing about this entire conversation, the idea that Missouri has that law. What do I think about that? I don't know what to think about that. I mean, you know...
It's almost a courtesy, if anything. Like if let's say I go out and I buy a house that's remote and it's a beautiful area, and I find that thing is just crawling with all sorts of activity, you know, and I finally go back to the realtor and they're like, well, yeah, you know, there was a horrible death there and this and that, and you know, oh, we burned a witch there, you know, or whatever.
You'd be irked.
I would be irked. You know, that's because you hear stories about people that have built houses on cemeteries that they didn't know there was an old cemetery there. But somebody who had, you know, access to old maps could have been like, yeah, there's, you know, that's common knowledge around these parts. But like a new suburb goes in and they find. I mean, you hear stories like
on
that.
the thing.
Yeah.
I don't know why, when you were telling this story, I heard it in a British voice, where, like, I pictured you buying a house, and you're there with, like, a monocle having your morning tea, and you're like, good God, this place is positively crawling with spectral activity. going to write a very strongly worded letter to the council. Like, I don't know why. That's just how I heard that. I'm quite peeved with my realtor. 7% interest rate, and I get a haunting to boot? Absolute bloody cheek. More so than West Texas, if you were going to have a place that would be haunted, I would say Missouri is a great place for a haunted.
Why is that? Just the history alone, or the...
Well, so everybody always forgets Missouri was an extraordinarily bloody place historically. I mean, you were talking the Cahokia people were just across the river. This was a traditional range of, I believe, the Osage would be the native people inhabited to that. St. Louis City alone was built on many of their sacred spots. This region was very, very heavily inhabited prior to even the French fur traders coming up the river and establishing St. Louis. I've heard it said in the early days of St. Louis, we weren't allowing agriculture because they were trading so heavily with the natives. This is a bloody land. And Missouri too, you've got Bleeding Kansas, the whole abolition fight with the Kansas Free State. You've got, I forget the exact Civil War order, but there was an order in northern Missouri that essentially, probably rightly so, told people they had to leave their farms and houses and gather in the cities, and anybody caught out there would be shot and their stuff burned because it was such a hotbed. So, I mean, we've talked about in previous things having rural areas, places where the dark can be, is susceptible to that, but Missouri's not like the sexy, cool, like, we had big wars. There were just a lot of really nasty things that happened and have happened and continue to happen in this land. And so I feel like because of its length of settlement time, it's kind of ripe for these spectral occurrences.
Sissy was a former city council member in a small town in Texas. Her husband Bob was a surgeon at the local ER. They have 2 children, a boy and a girl. Things were fine until the events began in their historic Victorian-style home. The events took place years before she shared her story in 1994. The peculiar events weren't so obvious at first, her kids talking to someone in their bedroom just before bedtime, and when asked, claimed it was a person sitting in the bedroom window. There was no one sitting in the bedroom window. In the morning, Sissy would help put their shoes on, and thought she could see someone peeking around the corner of the bedroom doorway from the corner of her eye. She would immediately turn to look, and no one would be there. Her kids would laugh. One day she was heading to the grocery store, and saw a silhouette of a woman in the doorway of their guest room. She had a small waist and flowing hair. She questioned the sighting for years. Was it really a person standing there? The woman had no face, and she had a tiny waist. When the house was built, there was no indoor plumbing at the time. Later, bathrooms were put in with his and her bathroom. One evening, Bob woke up and went to his bathroom. Their daughter loved to sing. Sissy said she would hum songs at dinner while eating. Bob could hear his daughter singing in the other room, until it dawned on him that his wife and daughter were in California. It was not his daughter singing. On a different night, something woke Bob up. He could see a bright light in the hallway through the historic transom window above the bedroom doorframe. The light seemed to be getting brighter and brighter. Eventually, the light moved into the bedroom through the transom window. The light was the shape of a ball and was now hovering over the bed. As Bob watched anxiously, the light vanished. Being on the city council, Sissy did not discuss the strange happenings in their home. It was their home, though. They did not know who to turn to. The town historian believed their house might have been the one that where recently deceased were brought to, bathed, and placed in a coffin in the living room for the passerby to pay their respects. She did confide in their friends who lived in Colorado. When they asked how the ghost was, Sissy told them how the situation seemed to be getting worse. The friends told her that Sissy needed to stand her ground and tell the spirits that she is a Christian woman and ghosts are not welcome. From Sissy's recollection, most of the activity happens on the second floor. She recalls one terrifying event when Bob was working late in the ER. She noticed something in the reflection in her bedroom mirror. She ignored it and went back to sleep. Several hours later, she heard a banging sound. Sissy figured their cat was trapped in the cupboard again. She got up and went down the hall to where the cupboard was. She opened the cupboard and discovered no cat. The noise was not coming from the cupboard, but the noise was coming from the attic above. She could hear someone's footsteps in the attic, walking in a circle. As they walked in the circle, they banged on things. She ran downstairs in panic and called Bob at the ER. Bob was currently handling an emergency at the ER, so Sissy waited on the phone for him as the banging got louder and louder. When Bob finally answered the phone, he could hear a frantic Sissy and the noises in the background. He raced home. Clearly, someone had broken into their home and was circling around the attic and banging on items. The attic mirrored the lower floors of the house with large windows in a large room. What was odd is, to Sissy, is who would walk in circles like this and just bang on things in the attic. The intruder's walk in circles got wider and was now closer to the surrounding wall. As the intruder's circle now entered the wall, the noise stopped. Bob arrived and hurried up the stairs to the attic. He searched the attic and found no one. The windows were all closed. Days later, Sissy had her fill and decided to do what was recommended. She told it to leave. After that, nothing else happened, and Sissy was never sure if her telling it to leave is what actually stopped the activity in their home. The last odd event that happened was the odor of someone cooking toast. Sissy said they would smell toast cooking, but no one was in the kitchen cooking toast. Each of the family members investigated this event, but could never find anyone in the kitchen cooking toast. This went on for a while, and they would joke about it. Oh, I guess the ghost is hungry and having toast.
Nope. Nope. I don't even know where to begin, Craig. I don't. There's so many questions I have.
Go to it,
So many
please.
thoughts I have. Well, one, have any of them died of a stroke?
No, not that I know of. I mean, I got this story. I
mean,
documented
normally that toast smell is not considered good. Medically, like,
well, her husband was an ER surgeon.
if you smell toast. I only think about this because there was a big storm the other day, and I was asleep, and you know how like lightning will flash, and you'll see the flash before you hear the thunder?
Sure.
I was dead asleep, and I saw a bright light behind my closed eyes, and I thought, here it is, I'm having a stroke. And then I heard thunder, and I was like, okay. So it's near and dear to my head right now, so I'm like, ugh, bruh, you've been getting haunted, and now you're smelling toast? Might want to get that old blood pressure check, my dog. Statins are your friend. That was the only thing with the toast that concerned me, because I've heard stories of, and I wonder in this case, I've heard stories of people having experienced aggressive haunting symptoms near to psychosis, like houses that are haunted, everybody's freaking out, people are having mood swings, rages, everything like that, and eventually they figure out that the house is infested with black mold. Which, the mold spores can affect your brains. And similarly, I've heard stories in the Victorian era. I mean, you're talking about, there's lead in their paint. They're doing all manner of substances. They get cough syrup with cocaine in or codeine or whatever. But you also have gas that is for the first time being piped into houses. And you have to assume that gas piping standards in the Victorian era weren't quite up to the standards that we have now.
Correct.
And so you're kind of like, okay, what's spectral and what's you've been dosing a little bit too much lead, having a little bit too much laudanum, and you have an active gas leak in your house, and you're wearing a corset. I mean, that is literally the definition of, and so whenever I hear about these old houses and these things happening. I'm like, was the pipe check? Are you good? And I'm not mocking it. I'm just, I think, like, anytime you're asking these questions, you have to move from the verifiable, the checkable, if you will, that's not the word, but the things you can rule out. What did Sherlock Holmes say? When you ruled out the possible, the only thing left is the impossible. Like, and that's the problem with a lot of these anecdotal stories, because we know the house is pre-plumbing. We know probably a lot of the stuff is very old. If they had electricity, it was probably knob and tube. There are a lot of potential things that could be happening in that house that would cause the perception of these events. Now, there's a few that don't. The sound of the walking in the attic that is held over a phone, that is a little bit heavier than seeing things out of the corner of your eye, right? Because that's independent, separated by space and time, and you're not breathing in the same air. Makes a little more sense. One of the curious questions, and I don't think it's one you would have known to ask, is which direction was the ghost walking?
I have to look at the video again to see if she did like a direction with her hand, like which way.
Because the question is, what I'm thinking is widdershins or not. You familiar with widdershins?
I am not.
Widdershins is an old term for anti-clockwise. Most people, when they make a circle, they inadvertently make it in a clockwise manner, akin to the movement of a sun around a sundial. That is considered a natural movement. Many people do that. In certain occult phenomenon, moving widdershins is considered in opposition to the natural order. It could be, in some cultures, considered unlucky, or anything within that host. So when you tell me this thing is moving in a circle, I'm like, which direction though? Which direction though? But, and this is the thing, I feel like, a lot of times with these anecdotal stories, in the moment, no one's thinking to ask these questions. Someone's like, yo, I was at the house last night, I got super freaked out because this ghost was moving around my damn house.
Well, and you have to understand and remember, in the story, she thought somebody was in the house, an intruder, not a spirit. Every time these things would happen, and she says this in the interview, she was not convinced, would not allow herself to be convinced that it was anything but someone messing with them.
Well, you're a city councilman in Texas. That's not exactly low on the list of likelihoods.
Well, and that's the thing with all of these stories. Everybody that's involved with them, like even a couple of the stories, like the Jefferson County story, that person said they struggled with the whole ghost story phenomenon because they said, I just have a problem with it. But they don't know how to explain any of this stuff, like how it happens or why. And, it's the same thing with all of these stories we go over. These people that it happens to were not looking for it. They weren't excited about, I want to move into a house where I have these things that scare me out of my mind, or when I go in the woods and I encounter creatures or whatever, all the stuff that we've talked about. None of these people volunteered for it. It just happened, and they've struggled for a long time trying to figure out a way to not say it's something that's the obvious. They don't want to believe.
They're struggling for a rational explanation for what they're experiencing.
Right, and they've gone through the motions. They've questioned everything. And that's how I got these stories. I feel like if you show up and you're willing to lend an ear to somebody that has something that they struggle with in life, you will get a handful of these stories where something has happened. They cannot come up with a way to explain all of it. And they have so much detail. I always find this interesting with people that witness something. And they don't know how to explain it or how to figure it out and when they tell you the story, they go into so much detail on it because they have played it over and over in their head and it doesn't fit in the box. Like it doesn't make sense, and that's their thing, it changes their way of thinking on everything. Like, my gosh, is this real? Is this... But they want to think it's something else. Like, had you been there and said to her, I think your house has black mold, she would have ate that up. They would have probably called somebody to have them come out and come look at the house, and investigate it. They would take that over some entity from another dimension, the afterlife, whatever, that is messing with them in their home because it's coexisting with them.
Well, of course. I mean, because that's the rational thing to do. I mean, look, if we had a story, okay, and this guy was like, I got ghosts. Mm-hmm. Like, have you had your house checked for black mold? And they're like, black mold is a government conspiracy. You would discount the entire spectral story, no matter how real. You'd be like, I mean, humans by their nature are an unreliable narrator. But if you're not going to rule out the most plausible explanations first, no one's really going to listen to you downstream of that. You've got to put a little work in to at least sort these things out.
And I think at the time, it was just collecting and gathering stories. It wasn't until later that I started hearing repetitive stories. Similar situations with another family. And it would be like a face is missing on what they were seeing in the hallway. And I'm like, this person, there's no way they know this other family in a different state, yet they're seeing the same thing. And there's this pattern event that it's doing to them, what it was doing to the same family. And I always find that intriguing. That kind of freaks me out. When I hear about similarities in these stories with people that are unrelated or no how back then knew each other. Or knew I would show up asking questions about it. Or I heard this, can you tell me more?
Well, and we touched on this in one of the early podcasts. I'd be really curious to examine stories of hauntings from older places like Europe. Mm-hmm. Because I posited very early on, and I feel this very strongly, that there are stories or ideas or motifs that run throughout a culture. I mean, they did a whole study where they were showing people shapes, and invariably the people would look at the thing with 8, and they're like, ugh, I don't like 8. And the scientists were like, what is going on? Like, what was out there that is what is going on in the human brain that says you see 8 protuberances and you're like, nah, fam, I'm out. Like, I feel like there are things that both run within our both conscious and unconscious nature. And so I feel like sometimes these stories, I really kind of wonder back at what undercurrents are running within the society. And so I'm very curious. I would really love to hear the difference between, like, we've talked extensively about America versus, like, Asia versus Europe. A lot of people don't know this about me. And this is a bit of a rambling, but this is to my point about an unconscious genetic memory. I cannot stand people that look like Ron Perlman. Did you ever hear that about me?
No.
You didn't know this?
I've never heard that.
Look,
Is this something you want to edit out?
I love and respect Ron Perlman.
Okay.
You
can't stand people that look like Ron Perlman.
That jowly, look. When I used to work in retail, every time I'd see someone with those jowls, I would want to smash their head with the nearest rock. Like, it was not...
Do they have to have a mustache?
No, it's something in that jowl structure that, like...
Okay.
I used to call them great white apes. Like, I would see people with that feature, and I'm like, burn them. Burn them, burn them, burn them, kill them, fight them. It was never like, I would like this person to leave. It was a primal urge to be like, nah.
You were going to jump over the counter and go to town.
And go to town in the most... Jerry, who you know, my good friend Jerry, he was like, bro, I'm pretty sure your ancestors were fighting dudes with that facial feature. Like, 3,000 years ago, y'all were beefing with the big jowl people. And it's just in you now. Like, you don't even know why. I like Ron Perlman. He was Hellboy. I can't disrespect the man. But that facial feature has a visceral reaction to me.
Wow.
And so I always wonder, when you're talking about stories that I'm what's going on in the human unconsciousness, either in the societal gestalt or the genetic gestalt or whatever. What's that linkage? That may be a little random.
I feel that way about minivans.
This story took place back in, it had to be around 1994. It was told to me by Gideon. I was staying with my family. They lived in this little town in Texas. And Gideon was a friend, would visit with often. In the town, there was this old, historic square. A lot of the buildings were pretty old, dating back to before turn of the century, late 1800s. And there was an old building that was used for tintype photography. It was mostly for tourists. If they wanted to come in and get their photo taken, like an old tintype photo with, where they're wearing Western attire. This was kind of, a thing people did. So 2 ladies owned the store, and they would take courses at Six Flags on how to use the camera. It was an old style camera. And one of the things they were taught was to never let the camera sit on the floor. One morning, one of the ladies came in to open the store, and there was a camera was out, and it was all the way down on the floor. The tripod legs were spread all the way out. And she freaked out and got upset. It was like, what's the deal? Who did this? So she immediately thought it was her partner. So her partner showed up, and she didn't know anything about it. So another person eventually comes in that they knew, a friend, and they were trying to figure out what had happened. They also had discovered that a heavy chair from upstairs had been moved downstairs and was placed, in front of the camera, and draped across the chair was a woman's dress. So the friend asked, they said, well, did you check the camera to see if a photo had been taken? So they go and look, and sure enough, there was a photo that had been taken in the camera. Sitting in the camera. So they developed the photo, and in the photo, there's a little girl, probably the age of 8 or 9, and she's sitting in the chair, the heavy chair that was brought downstairs during the night, and she's wearing the dress. The little girl has no face. Her face is completely cut out. So they got to thinking, what is this? Is this a prank? Is this, what's going on? So they noticed other little odd things happening and figured place is haunted. Gideon was, walking down the square area one evening, and she knew the store owners and the two ladies that had owned the photography shop, camera store. Eventually, it went out of business. They just couldn't make the money off of it. So another business moved in. But above the business, there was an apartment for rent. So she saw this young man heading up the staircase to go into the apartment, and she stopped him and said, hey, how do you like living there? And he's like, oh, it's nice. My wife and I are, we're happy with it. And she said, do you have any bizarre things happening in your apartment? He stopped and looked at her, oddly. Then he said, well, actually we do. So Gideon and her husband took this young couple that was living in the apartment to dinner one night just to hear about the happenings, the goings on in the apartment. And he said when they moved in, his wife was in the bathroom and she was unpacking a box, and there was newspaper from them unpacking laying out on the floor. All of a sudden she hears this, or all of a sudden she sees this little girl slide by on the newspaper, like just hits the ground on her knees and slides on the newspaper, and she's laughing. So she got mad, thinking, well, whose child is this? So they searched the apartment and couldn't find her. They started noticing bizarre things happening in the apartment. You know, the little girl would start laughing or would pull little pranks on them. The husband said that one evening he noticed there was a carving in the coffee table, like somebody had taken a knife and had carved this strange symbol on the coffee table. The next morning he got in his car to go to work and noticed that same symbol was carved on his steering wheel, on the horn portion of the steering wheel. It got bad to where she was pulling these little pranks on him. Again, they didn't know whose child this was, or you know, obviously it was a ghost. So they yelled at her to stop. They could actually see the silhouette of this little girl sitting, you know, in a corner, and she was crying. So they had a sit-down talk with her, and they said, you can stay, but you've got to behave. You can't be doing this kind of stuff. The husband said that his wife would even in the evenings lay down in bed and read children's stories to her. One of his friends or colleagues, I guess, had heard about this and had always wanted to see a ghost. He was really excited about this and just really wanted to see a ghost. So they invited him over for dinner. And he apparently, she never showed up, never made a presence. So he went home disappointed. And later that night, the husband said he got a phone call. And it was the friend. And he was panicking. The little girl was jumping on his bed. She had gone home with him. So he was in a panic, didn't know what to do. Gideon then said that they had to contact a priest. And the priest came to the house where the little girl was, the friend's house. And I asked Gideon, you know, what happened? And she said, well, I'm not going to give you details. She said, in fact, I can't give you details. But she said, I will say this. While the priest was there and they were doing what they needed to do, her mother came and got her.
So great. I'm not going to sleep well tonight. I don't even know how to take that. I mean, one, you have people that, I mean, from that story, it seems the little girl had more agency. You know, if they can reason with her, if they're doing things. It sounds like just a little playful girl. And it sounds like they came to a very nice detente with her. You know what I mean? Like, spectral child wants to be loved. You read some stories and just be like, don't be super mischievous, and you get along well. And it seems like that's very harmonious until some dumbass was like, I want to see ghosts. And she was like, oh, I'm about to ruin this man's whole life. You know, I mean, it is surprising because you feel like if she was tied to the place, she would have stayed with the place. If she was tied to the people, she would have stayed with the people. Not just necessarily been like, oh, rando, gonna follow him home and make his life hell. I mean, the whole thing is very creepy. Don't like any of that.
And I've heard a story where you hear the stories of, here's another category, I don't know if you want to go,
Sure.
the hitchhiker ones. They're willing to travel to a location or elsewhere. You hear the stories about the people that are,
picking people on the side of the road.
and they're not real, or you go to drop them off, they're gone, or, you know, and I've heard stories firsthand from people that have said, I went to go get in my car, and there was activity at their home, and someone wanted to go with them, and the person telling me the story said, I had to tell them no, get out of my car. You know, and they left, but they didn't want to. They wanted to leave. But it's like, how does that work? I thought ghosts could fly.
I've never had any. Nor do I want them. Nor do I want these
Hitchhikers.
I'm perfectly happy to live a non-spectrally infused life. Well, and that was one of the things I was going to say is, you know, I am a fairly practical person, and I've always laughed. My grandmother, if you asked her, would have described herself as being 100% Catholic, purely Catholic. And when I went to Japan, 17 going on 18 for the first time, she kept a candle burning the entire time I was gone to lead me home. She would in fact keep it in the bathroom so she didn't burn the house down. And I was extraordinarily close to my grandmother. I won't belabor you with the stories. She knew I arrived in Japan hours, you know, like time sank and weird stuff. We were very, very close. But the whole time she kept a candle burning. She would put it in the bathtub when she went to work so it could burn during the day. She'd switch it out at night, kept it going the entire month I was gone. Constant candle burning to lead me home. When I came home, she was like, well, you know, it's very Catholic. No, Grandma. There's nothing in Catholicism that has anything to do with burning candles to lead people home. You know, things creep through the walls. Like, she was a good Irish Catholic, and I think some of the old beliefs just kind of, you know, rode that Catholicism train right in there. And much in her vein, I have always been sort of that eminently practical person, which I'm like, we are people of science and reason and light. And yet, you know, when we bought this house, we have various fairly witchy friends, and they wanted to purify the house. And I was like, absolutely. Like, go ahead. I think we've got eggshells buried at the four corners. You know, it's been smudged, the whole 9 yards. If you talk to my wife, you know, the energy in this house was not bad. But she will tell you that after that happened, that the energy in the house felt more neutral, more like a tabula rasa, if you will, rather than with the weight of the previous. So with all of these things, I guess my statement is, yes, by all means, keep a rational mind. Check if the ghost is going widdershins. You know, keep these logical things. But if you have friends that can smudge a house, or if you want to put an iron horseshoe up over the door, it's not the worst thing. Iron horseshoe is a pleasing decoration. I mean, and I really feel that that's the kind of world I live in, where I'm like, I don't know if this is real, but
What the heck?
what's it gonna hurt?
Yeah.
What's it gonna hurt? And so I do have to say when we talk about these stories, I'm like, I ain't got nothing to do with that. I've never seen anything like that. And yet I'm in a totally ritually purified house. So Well, anyway, I mean, long and the short, I don't know how to explain those things. I came away from this with more questions. Like, before I was just like, we're talking about hauntings. And now I'm like, we've gone over at least 7 subcategories of hauntings, ranging from what looks like film blanks repeating, to agency, to out-and-out mischievousness. I still think the old dude that sits in people's laps is weird. I think that's.
He was a weird dude. He won't leave. Like, they brought somebody in, a psychic, or some kind of, the way it was described, whatever, a person you bring in to talk to them and remove them. And they literally told him, this person won't leave. He won't leave. He's not going to, they said.
He's just having too much fun.
He's having too much fun.
Have they tried throwing money at him?
No.
Who was it who said any technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic? We'd have to look the quote up. But basically, the tech we have now, you show up to a medieval peasant, you're getting burned.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
sure.
You're getting burned. Like,
yeah.
Because they didn't have the ability to understand that technological leap. Now, that's not to say that those laws of physics and energy transmission and all of that we have since discovered to build these things, it's a normal thing to look at that. Because what looks like magic to what we have now that we know the rules of, if we showed it to someone in the past, magic. Because they didn't understand the rules. They didn't understand that science. And so I feel like when you're talking about things we don't understand, the most natural thing is to look at the logical extrapolation of that phenomenon. How does that work? Because just because we don't understand it doesn't mean it's not following certain rules. Energy transmission, electrical conduction through copper, laws of condensation, steam engines, all of that was in play. You could build that. If you had a time machine, you went back to fucking the year 1000. All of that would still work. They just didn't know how to do it. And so I feel like when you're looking at these, it is actually much more sensible to try to find a scientific reason. Whether you'd be like, we're sucking energy from the environment, we're utilizing graviton waves, I don't know what it is, but it's way more rational than just hand wave. And you'd be like, we got ghosts in the house, and they'd be moving shit. Like... when you were talking about the people thinking about things over and over and over and replaying the memory, that is the most dangerous point for them to interject new information. The more times you look at a memory, the less real it becomes.
I don't even know how to add to that. The more time you look at a memory, the less real it becomes. You mean like people that have had an experience and they go over and over and over on it? Mm-hmm. They talk themselves out of it.
Or they alter it, or details
modify
are introduced.
And I've caught myself doing that, thinking back to an experience that happened, and I will luckily have had something captured at the moment, whether it was video or audio, and I'll go back and I'll listen to it, and I'm like, oh, I had that kind of wrong.
Yeah, the brain is a very weird thing, and so the more times you're polishing a memory, the more suspect it's becoming. And that also dovetails with my next thing, new science.
All right.
Keep a Game Boy close.
So that, I guess, is our episode?
Yeah, sorry it wasn't as funny as normal. I apologize.
Well, but we weren't, like, really deep into whiskey shots or,
I appreciate
drinking games.
My headphones. I would say that if anybody listens to this one, share your stories in the comments.
Please do.
Because we put it on YouTube, and I would really love some involvement if someone wants to argue or say something or be like, well, I have a story about X, Y, and Z.
Please do promote the show.
Signing off. Still
Signing off.
curious.
Thanks again, Adam. It was a great show.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you for having me. Again, I'm sorry I didn't research the science of ghosts. I kept meaning to, but most of my time spent on a work computer, and I don't want my business masters to feel like, why are you researching ghost temperature waves during business hours?
Eerie, a podcast. Eerie about everything creepy. Eerie.
Southside 2-Bit Studios.